Hello, and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host, and today my guest and I are going to be exploring the rapidly changing world of coupling and uncoupling in the 2020s and beyond. So, one thing I've talked about on other shows is statistics show that marriage is changing as well as divorce. And with the younger generations, most notably millennials, they're a huge part of that change. Their, differing lifestyles have impacted both the marriage rate and the divorce rate. So my guest today is a millennial herself, but she's also a leading family law attorney. So she's really uniquely positioned to give us a look into these changing dynamics. So Yanae Barroso, it's very exciting to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Susan, for having me. I'm really excited to be here talking about this topic.
Yeah, it's a really interesting twist, and I think it signals sort of a seminal change as we go forward. That's why I think it's important to talk about it. I do want everyone to have a little background on you because you really have a very impressive background, especially for a young practitioner. It's one of the things that jumped out at me when we first got in touch. You are, as I mentioned, a family law and matrimonial attorney, and you have 11 years of over 11 years of practice. You were with the AV-rated firm of Fogel Rubin Fogel in Miami for several years. That firm recently closed when your partners retired. And so I would imagine very excitingly for you, you've now established your own law firm in Key West, Barroso Law.
Yep.
And that was recently?
Born and raised, and happy to be back serving my community.
And that's, it's exciting to also just be a female entrepreneur, having your own firm. I did that myself, but much further along in my career than you did. So I applaud you on that because I know there's a lot that goes into opening your own firm.
Definitely. Not easy, but the rewards are worth it for sure.
Yeah, well, and it got to be able to be back home, and you are married yourself, and we were just talking about your 2-year-old son and how interesting it's been to be quarantined with a 2-year-old.
Yes, so much fun.
Daycare is going to be something we're grateful for when we get back to the real world.
Eternally grateful for daycare after this experience.
So, well, I'm very excited to talk about this topic. When you first approached me with it, I was like, this is something that we really should be talking about because I'm always talking about the changing face of divorce from the perspective of shifting from an adversarial negative experience to the positive divorce movement. But what I haven't focused on and what I'm really happy we're going to look at today is the actual fact that marriage and divorce are actually changing as the world changes as well, as generations live differently, have different experiences. And that's always been true, right? My parents my parents weren't divorced, but, divorces of my parents' generation were very different than perhaps divorces of my generation, but divorces for your generation are also very different.
Yes, I've even noticed a change just since I've been practicing, which I know we're gonna cover today, but I've noticed some significant changes about divorces from, my first year in law school till now.
Yeah, it's really, well, I wanted to do some research on it. So I looked up a couple of statistics just to, have some facts behind this because I suspected it was changed, but didn't know the actual numbers. So a couple of just interesting stats. There's been a 24% decline in divorce rates since the 1980s. Most millennial couples are waiting longer to get married. I thought it was interesting. Many of them, the relationship between the couple is almost 5 years long before they take the step of getting married, which is, I think, different. I had only been dating my first husband for about 2 years when we got married, now almost 20 years ago. And this one I thought was really telling. 25% of millennials are likely to never marry at all. And there's something in that we're going to unpack, I think.
Yeah.
That's a telling statistic.
It is.
But let's just start right at the baseline, because I don't know that everybody has a clear conception. So let's get it from you. What is a millennial?
So a millennial is somebody who's born between 1981 and 1996, and they have, I think, a unique set of characteristics. They're tech savvy, and when I say there, I should say we, because I'm a millennial. We're very family centric. We place, family life above professional life, always searching for that perfect, work-life balance. That's very important to millennials. Very achievement and goal-oriented, especially with education and career. Always seeking instant gratification. I will admit that is definitely a common trait amongst millennials. And we're reluctant to jump directly into marriage, as you were stating. Just, starting families and everything like that, we take it into consideration. I think we place a higher value on it than maybe the generation before us.
Yeah, I think those are all, I think, really significant factors that do play into the declining divorce rate, the declining marriage rate, and, the fact that I think many people of your generation may not ever get married. Now, it doesn't mean they won't have relationships and significant long-term relationships, but marriage may not play into it.
Right. I agree.
So, one thing that I read in another study that, or an article, actually my cousin wrote it. She does HR work, and she was talking about attracting millennials to companies. And one thing I thought was really significant about millennials is they are also very motivated, or the article said that they were, you tell me, because they were looking for companies that were community minded, that gave back. And I know you have a passion project that you've worked on with Congress, in fact, but that seems to be something I think that is very motivational in your generation as well, having that passion project, giving back. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I have two projects. I have the pro bono committee. I represent a lot of people in my community pro bono that, just can't afford legal services. I feel like that's a way I can give back. And then also, as you mentioned, my work with United States Congress on further protecting the endangered species that are native to our island, which is the Florida key deer. So yeah, I do see that common trend amongst millennials, always looking to give back to the community, whether it be through donating or a drive or, anything like that, just to give back.
Yeah, and I think that that's an interesting thing, because that motivation and driver to give back has somewhat shifted the focus of this generation, I think, from wealth building to existing in a society at large, and that giving back. Maybe I would say the generation I grew up in, and I'm not even sure what the name of my generation might be, or the earlier ones, amassing wealth and success on that level did seem to have a great deal to do with the generation drivers. So there were often financial factors that brought couples together. And maybe that's one of the things that's also that lack of focus on amassing wealth or financial success may also be something that is relative to the relationship status of your generation.
Right. It goes back to placing that value on family centric, really having that work-life balance. It's more important than accumulating wealth, spending quality time with your family, even with yourself, penciling in time to go to the gym in the morning, things like that, all of that's very important, and it's not easy, but I think it's doable. And I think our generation has proved that it's doable, even in some of the largest companies. A lot of them, these Fortune 500 companies, have changed drastically over the years to accommodate millennials. They've got gyms in the workplace, they've got childcare in the workplace. They're just so much more accommodating because they see that, we're really running the workforces. We're the people that are the future. So they have to accommodate in some sense.
Well, in fact, all our institutions do, including marriage and divorce, right? Because your generation is the up and coming, you're right, workforce of our future. One thing I thought when I was looking at the stats as well is, the fact that it said many millennials are actually afraid of divorce, and that's one of the things that maybe deters them. And I wondered if the rise of divorce rates in their parents' generation, so that more millennials have now seen families go through divorce as a part of their childhood. Do you think that has played into your generation's,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. I think that the prior generation, our parents, most of us have lived through their divorces. We've seen the high divorce rates. We've learned from it. We're somewhat jaded. We don't want that for ourselves. So we are waiting longer to get married. But I also think prioritizing achievements and educations and, trying to get through that, almost like your 20s, you're focused on graduating and then landing that dream job, building up your resume, achieving all of your personal goals. And then you're like, okay, I'm in a place now where I can think about and consider marriage. And by that time, you've been sometimes in a relationship for quite a few years. And I think it's helpful in a sense because it lays a good foundation for your relationship because you waited a little bit longer. I know my husband and I have been together since high school, so we've kind of, grown up together. So that in a sense too, we've been through this whole trajectory of education, like I said, building a resume, and then starting a family or getting married and then starting a family. So I think that helps. You really get to know someone over a longer period of time while you're achieving your personal goals.
Yeah, well, and, so you've mentioned education there, and I was, another thing that struck me is your generation is buried in educational debt.
Yes.
And that you're the first generation that is facing that as well, right? The cost of a quality education and the competition to get that has become extraordinarily difficult and extraordinarily expensive, leading to extraordinary student debt. And I've wondered if that plays into the marital situation for your generation.
Oh, I think so for sure. I mean, I don't even know that I can count on maybe one hand how many friends that have been through, college education that don't have debt, that didn't graduate with an amount of debt, especially law students, my colleagues from law school. I mean, we've got astronomical student loan debt out there. And I do think that plays heavily on both parties before they enter a marriage. What am I bringing to the table? You're bringing this debt. And so you just feel like this overwhelming desire to have to pay it off, not enter a marriage with so much debt and things like that. So yeah, I think that could deter marriage as well for millennials.
Well, and just the fact that a wedding itself costs a lot of money.
Right.
And if you're facing, I think a law school education is in the range of well over $100,000 these days for the 3 years of law school. So if you are funding that through student loans and you have college debt, you could have a couple $100,000 of debt as you're starting at 25 out in the world-ish, 25-ish, depending on when you went to law school, or even undergrad. I have a nephew who attended a fantastic university, but ended up graduating undergrad with like $150,000 in debt.
Yeah.
So top tier level education is expensive.
Right.
So how does that, as couples are entering into the concept of combining their households, they're also facing that concept of bringing this huge debt into the marriage and debt and carrying debt, right? It costs money to service debt every month.
Yes.
So your generation has that just negative start right to begin of probably hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a month in a debt payment that's going to go on for a significant period of time.
Yeah, I think it just causes a lot of pressure on certain relationships. I mean, you think about, how am I going to qualify for a mortgage? How are we going to buy a home? How are we going to afford children when we've got, especially if you're marrying somebody who also has equal debt or even something, relatively close to what you're bringing in for your debt. So yes, it's a huge factor. And, some people are fortunate to have a workaround and some extra support from their family, but I know that's not the case for everybody. And I can only imagine it's a lot of pressure coming into a marriage or any relationship, even if it's not going to result in marriage with all of this debt.
Yeah. I mean, it has to be a significant factor. And, the other thing that I thought may factor in is, older generations were still fairly traditional in the career path of men and women. And women still tended to be in either stay at home or career paths that were less focused perhaps on success, because women were bifurcating in the taking care of the family and home and pursuing career. Whereas in your generation, do you think that's as true?
No, I actually read a study from 2018 that millennial women are more educated than men, which I'm really proud to say, because that's not always been the case. We've not always been provided that opportunity. But yeah, actually the study said it was 43% women compared to 38% men who graduated with a 4-year degree in our generation. So I think that has made women more financially independent overall, less likely to get married for financial reasons. And, they can buy their home on their own. They can finance their life. They can get a car. So those things aren't at the forefront. They have more time to focus on themselves and take time to focus on a relationship before just diving into a marriage, just because that's what you have to do in order to survive. So,
yeah, I think the whole paradigm has shifted there. Right?
Yes, for sure.
And that actually leads to another significant factor that I think is relevant in your generation, and just something that I have seen in the legal practice is the rise of the prenuptial agreement, even in first marriages. It used to be sort of the thing like when you were getting married in your second marriage or you had significant wealth,
right.
You would see prenups. But now, they're really on the rise. And I think it may have something to do with what we were just talking about.
Yeah, so this is actually one of the big changes, like we talked about in the beginning, that I've seen even since I started practicing law. When I first started practicing, I would see, like you just said, a lot of uber wealthy people that are like, one party is super wealthy and they say, I really need a prenuptial agreement or I'm not getting married, that type of thing. But now I see a huge shift where I get phone calls for one party looking for a prenuptial agreement, but the other party wants it equally as well. They want to protect all of their hard work and their interests and their assets as much as the other party does. So that is a huge change. And I think it almost makes it easier when you've got two parties that both want to do that. They both want to enter into this agreement to protect themselves. And it somewhat flows better, because it's kind of an uncomfortable, process before you get married. You're like, okay, we're talking about what'll happen in the event of a divorce, or setting ourselves up for failure, so to speak. But yeah, I've noticed that huge change definitely in the practice of family law.
Yeah, I have done far more prenuptial agreements in the later years of my 30 years than earlier on. Earlier on, it was almost always that situation where we had one uber wealthy party or one party with significant wealth, and they were marrying someone that did not have that same level. But the other thing I've seen the rise of, and I wonder if you have as well, is cohabitation agreements or co-ownership agreements, when a couple who's not married, but they purchase a home together, or get a dog together. I just did one of those agreements not that long ago, because, laws are changing around pet ownership, but they still in many states are treated like a piece of furniture. And this couple wanted to make sure it was clear what happened if they broke up. Are you seeing more of that type of agreement as well?
I have seen a couple of those. I don't draft them personally. I outsource them to more of like a real estate attorney, but I do get the phone calls, the exact same thing. We're not married. We have no intention of being married, but we want to purchase a home together, and we want to talk about what would happen in the event that we break up, that type of thing. So yes, I've definitely seen that.
Well, I actually think it's smart, because I've also seen the situation where they don't have an agreement, they do break up, and now what do you do?
Right. and they both want the home. You can't split it in half, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's a little hard to cut it down the middle or put the tape down the center, the duct tape.
Exactly.
So one of the things in doing my research is, and many people, you see this statistic all over the place, that the overall divorce rate is declining. I talked about that. It's down like 24%. But it doesn't mean that there are less divorces per the number of marriages. That rate actually for first marriages has held pretty steady at 50%. It's almost like 1 in 2 first marriages are going to one is going to make it and one is going to end in divorce. I like to focus on the positive. But what are the issues particular to millennial divorces when your generation is part of that 50%? Because now they've very likely waited longer to get married. They are more likely to have a prenup, but what are the issues they're going to face?
I think the two that are at the forefront are financial issues. As we discussed, you've got tremendous debt on both sides most of the time, a high cost of living. And the other is infidelity, trust issues because of social media. I mean, that's a major part of our life these days. There's constant comparison to other people, other relationships. This person's traveling more than us. Why can't we travel? Why can't we afford this? It's like the grass is greener on the other side concept. It's just constant in your face, always there. You're always seeing it, always browsing every day. And it eats away at some people. And some of these relationships just can't survive that. It causes tremendous trust issues and insecurity.
That's actually fascinating, right? That your generation is so impacted with the rise of social media. You are definitely the first generation to experience that, right? Social media did not exist in the fashion that it does today. Right. When I was your age or younger or getting married for the first time. And so I hadn't ever even thought about that constant comparison to the perfection that we all portray our lives to be on social media. Wow. I mean,
and the pressure, you see these lavish weddings, you're following all these bloggers and they've got the perfect ring, the perfect wedding destination, the perfect family, because of course they're only posting the perfect picture every time. They're not showing, all the negative things. But yeah, it's a lot of pressure. And I think it definitely impacts millennial relationships.
Oh, now that you say it, I can't imagine it doesn't. But, it's interesting because I, didn't start spending any time on social media really until the past couple of years once I started having podcasts, because it's a wonderful way to reach listeners and interact with my listeners because, people want to reach out. But I have noticed just what a role it plays in even relationships. Like they talk about a relationship just when, what is the phrase? Like Insta, where they show up, like a celebrity couple shows up on the red carpet and they get an Instagram post for the very first time. So it's now Insta official.
Insta official, right.
Yeah, right. Like until you show up on Instagram holding each other's hands, you don't exist as a couple.
You didn't need anything before then. Exactly. Yeah.
And that's where people are announcing their divorces as well.
Yep.
It's not done like they used to call People, I think, and put it out in People magazine. Now everybody puts out a joint Instagram statement saying, we love each other still, and we've made the loving decision to part respectfully. Exactly. And we hope, so that is really interesting. And I think, in thinking about that and sort of taking it a little further, technology, you mentioned it in the beginning, the advances of technology and the way that technology, especially in the last few months, right, of our lives, but really significantly throughout your lifetime, has become such an important day-to-day, minute-to-minute impact in our lives. That has to interplay into millennial relationships as well.
Yeah, you're right. That's a really good point. Now the iPhone, and anybody that has an iPhone, I'm sure other phones do it as well, but it tracks the time that you've spent on social media. And sometimes even for myself, it's staggering. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have really spent this much time of my week on social media. But yeah, that plays into it as well. That can make another spouse or another party in the relationship feel like, you're placing that above the relationship, that's more important. But sometimes it's tied, I know for me, it's tied to work. A lot of it is. I run my own social media accounts for my firm. And so sometimes it really is work related. I'm not just hanging out, texting friends. I'm working from my phone. But I can definitely see how that can trigger some issues within a relationship.
Well, and even so say it's not social media, say, because I happen to run all my businesses through my phone for the most part too, but I can tell you my husband can get a little irritated when at 8 o'clock at night I'm answering emails or making a change on my website because I have a webinar coming up, and I'm working. I'm legitimately working. I'm not scrolling through, LinkedIn or something like that. But do you think that just the constant access to our work life through our mobile devices now also puts a strain on relationships?
Yes, there's no off button. I mean, there isn't. You can turn off your notifications, but you're going to get it, especially in family law, where a lot of times you have to be so accessible, to your clients. Yeah. Sometimes it's like being an on-call doctor. I mean, I know the comparison sounds strange, but it's true. People are going through, families in particular, some of the hardest times of their lives. And sometimes at 9 o'clock at night, they need you because there's an emergency and they don't know how to deal with it. And it could impact their case and their family, and you have to be available. So it's tough. It's definitely tough. It's hard to find a balance.
I think it is. And I think that may, for both, parties in a marriage, when it's, now that we almost are working 24/7 or need to be available 24/7, technology's kind of been a negative in that way. But there are other areas where I think technology is moving, relationships and definitely the positive process of divorce forward. There's now, for divorces that are going on now, there's services like It's Over Easy from Laura Wasser and Hello Divorce from Aaron Levine. And your generation, being so tech savvy, seems to be more willing to turn to technology to help them move through the process. Do you think that's helpful?
I do. I almost think they prefer it. I think millennials prefer to utilize as much technology as possible. I know I have a lot of clients that are in the millennial generation that would rather just text me than pick up the phone and make a quick call. They just, want to text it. A part of it is multitasking. But like you said, I think there's a lot of positives to it. I mean, we've got now, just recently due to COVID-19, we've got a lot of this mediation going on online more than ever. It's always been available, but people are now having to experience it and seeing, okay, wow, this is really good. This is a great resource and tool. Another one is, virtual therapy. There's a lot of apps where you can have therapy while you're commuting to work, or, doing something else. It's like multitasking, back to that again. Let's see. I think another great one would be the parenting apps, the co-parenting apps. A lot of my clients are very eager to communicate through that. It's instant gratification. You can immediately share with the other party expenses, schedules, things like that. It just makes it so much easier. So yeah, I think it's been really helpful.
Well, those co-parenting apps are nice because they put a little layer of technology between sometimes difficult conversations between co-parents as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of co-parenting apps as well. So, overall, that's a lot of the differences and how millennials have been impacted by, what's happening in your world and with respect to relationships, marriage, divorce. But if you were going to give some top tips to millennials who were going through divorce, what would your top level tips be?
I would say first to delete social media while you're going through the process. I've seen it hurt more than help.
Oh, yeah.
I know we want to post everything. I know we want to share our lives. We want to share an inspirational quote, especially when you're going through a tough time. But I think removing yourself from a social media presence during this process is extremely beneficial on like across the board, into parenting, into your finances, into business. It really affects everything. So I think that'd be number one. Secondly, utilize a lot of these apps that make our life easier. Back to the virtual therapy, I'm a big fan of that. I think that's just so accessible, especially if you're busy and now you are not having the other spouse around to kind of help out, whether at home with the kids or just around the house, and you don't have as much time to maybe attend an in-person live therapy session. You can get that benefit just through your phone. It could be while you're cooking or, driving. And the other thing would be use your technological savvy capabilities to help your lawyer organize all of your financial documents. That's going to save you so much time and money on attorney's fees. Just being able to pull that stuff from the internet and send it by email and organize it and things like that. It'll really move the case forward and help.
Yeah, that last one I can't emphasize enough to people. Just going, I remember back in the day when I would have clients like walk in with a box of like receipts and bills and pay stubs and sort of dump it on my desk.
Yeah.
And at hundreds of dollars an hour, people, that's not a very good use of your money.
Right.
Even if it's my paralegal doing it, it's very expensive.
Exactly. Yeah, I tell all my clients that. I'm like, to the extent you can go get everything online and send it to me electronically, you are saving hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in some of these cases. So.
Oh yeah. I actually have started using in my mediation practice with clients something called Detour Life, where they can actually just hook up all their financial accounts confidentially to the program, and it will upload all the statements, all of the numbers. Wow. It constantly will update them. So if we choose a date, say we're going to value the marital estate as of January 1, 2020, we can just put in that date. It will pull up the value of every account as of that date, and it's done.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, there's so much technology out there, right? And it's constantly coming down the pike, but your generation is open-minded and early adopters, which I think helps them.
Absolutely. They're always willing to take the technological route for sure. And it's just more practical this day and age.
Well, that's, and you do have a free gift for our listeners that's kind of along the lines of these top tips. You have your top 5 tips for millennial divorcees. What's the best way for them to get that, for listeners to get a hold of that?
So to access the podcast giveaway, I'm going to provide the link to Susan, and then she can share that with all the listeners in the show notes.
Perfect. So I'll have that in the show notes along with your contact information, but just so everyone who's listening has that, how can people get in touch with you?
You can access my website. It's www.barroso-law.com. which will also be provided in the show notes for spelling. I know it's not an easy one to spell. But yeah, you can access me there and contact me on Instagram at Barroso Law. I also have a LinkedIn page, same thing, Barroso Law, and Facebook.
Wonderful. Well, that all will be in the show notes. And I really appreciate this unique perspective, not unique, but unique to me, to many of my listeners. And, I appreciate the way that your generation's unique experiences in the world we live in today are what are making, I think, positive changes on relationships and on divorce itself. And I appreciate your sharing that with us all.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me and highlighting that information, because I feel like, millennials can get a little bit of a bad name due to some of our characteristics, especially from the more seasoned generations above us. But yes, it's been so much fun talking about this topic. It's one I really enjoy talking about. So thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you.